One sleeping princess, 6 palaces, a kingdom that felt less like an adventure and more like a desperate fight for survival. Zelda II, The Adventure of Link, divided the fanbase the moment it launched in 1987, and decades later, that divide remains as sharp as ever. But what if the game's notorious difficulty and jarring design choices didn't ruin its story? What if they accidentally created one of the darkest, most desperate versions of Hyrule the series has ever seen? The original Legend of Zelda established a formula that would define adventure games for generations. Released in Japan in February 1986 and hitting North America in August 1987, the first game presented Hyrule as a vast, interconnected world viewed from a top-down perspective. Players explored dungeons, collected pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom, and ultimately defeated Ganon to rescue Princess Zelda. The design philosophy was revolutionary for its time, an open world where exploration was rewarded, where secrets lurked in every corner, and where the kingdom of Hyrule felt unified and cohesive. Then came Zelda II, The Adventure of Link, released in Japan on January 14, 1987, less than a year after the original game's Japanese release. The sequel made a decision that would haunt its legacy. It transformed nearly everything players loved about the first game. Gone was the consistent top-down perspective, replaced by side-scrolling combat sequences. The simple heart-based health system gave way to experience points, leveling mechanics, and a lives system, the only time the mainline Zelda series would feature such a mechanic. The development team, led by producers Tadashi Sugiyama and Yasuhisa Yamamura, with Shigeru Miyamoto taking a producer role, drew inspiration from entirely different games. The combat system borrowed heavily from Irem's arcade game Kung Fu Master, while the role-playing elements took cues from Chunsoft's Dragon Quest, which had launched just months earlier in 1986. The shift wasn't subtle. In the original game, combat flowed naturally as part of exploration. Link moved through Hyrule's overworld and dungeons in one consistent perspective, fighting enemies that felt like natural inhabitants of the space. Zelda II fractured this cohesion. The overworld maintained a top-down view, but the moment Link entered a palace, town, or triggered an enemy encounter, the perspective lurched into side-scrolling mode. This wasn't just a cosmetic change, it fundamentally altered how players experienced Hyrule itself. In the original Legend of Zelda, Hyrule felt like a place, continuous, connected, real. Players could see enemies approaching in the distance, plan their routes, and move fluidly between areas. The game's difficulty came from pattern recognition, resource management, and spatial awareness within a unified world. Zelda II shattered that unity. Every enemy encounter on the overworld became a discrete combat arena, pulling Link into a separate battle space. The seamless flow of exploration transformed into a series of violent interruptions. Hyrule stopped feeling like an interconnected kingdom and began feeling like a collection of hostile zones, separated by loading screens disguised as perspective shifts. This design choice had profound narrative implications. The original game's Hyrule invited exploration. It was a kingdom to be discovered, with secrets hidden but ultimately accessible to the persistent player. Zelda II's Hyrule felt actively hostile, as if the land itself rejected Link's presence. The constant forced encounters, the jarring perspective shifts, and the isolated nature of each battle made Hyrule feel fractured, broken, disconnected from itself. And then there's the difficulty. Zelda II earned its reputation as arguably the hardest game in the entire Legend of Zelda franchise. The difficulty doesn't stem from cheap tricks or unfair mechanics, it comes from demanding precision and mastery in ways few NES games ever attempted. The game expects players to develop genuine skill, to learn enemy patterns with almost scientific precision, and to execute combat strategies with split-second timing. The Iron Knuckles stand as the perfect embodiment of this philosophy. These armored warriors appear throughout the game's 6 palaces: Parapa Palace, Medoro Palace, Island Palace, Maze Island Palace, Palace on the Sea, and Three-Eye Rock Palace. Iron Knuckles come in 3 varieties: orange, red, and blue, each progressively more dangerous. They wield swords and shields just like Link, able to block high or low, strike high or low, and respond to Link's movements with intelligent patterns. The orange iron knuckles serve as Link's introduction to truly skilled opponents. These enemies force players to abandon button mashing and develop real combat strategies. The recommended technique involves jumping toward the iron knuckle and striking downward at its head during the descent, one of the few reliable ways to land hits. But even this strategy requires precise timing, spatial awareness, and an understanding of the enemy's movement patterns. Red iron knuckles escalate the challenge with more health and greater attack power. Blue iron knuckles introduce a devastating new element. They throw sword beams just like Link does when at full health, forcing players to manage both melee and projectile threats simultaneously. Some blue iron knuckles can unleash up to 7 rapid attacks in succession, creating combat scenarios that test even veteran players to their limits. The game's designers placed these enemies strategically throughout the palaces, often guarding key items or blocking narrow corridors where jumping attacks become difficult or impossible. In tight spaces, players must employ advanced techniques, crouch stabbing, the jackhammer strategy where repeated downthrust attacks overwhelm enemies, or perfectly timed alternating strikes. The boss of Island Palace, Rebenak, fights as a blue iron knuckle after being knocked off his horse, serving notice that mastering these opponents isn't optional, it's survival. But the iron knuckles represent just one layer of Zelda II's punishing difficulty curve. The game features enemies that drain experience points when they hit Link, bubbles that reduce both health and magic simultaneously, wizards that teleport unpredictably while firing projectiles. The game's later palaces, particularly the 5th and 6th, throw multiple enemy types at players simultaneously: Doom Knockers with boomerang clubs, blue Paratomas with jumping down thrust attacks, and fiery Moas raining flames from above while players fight at ground level. The leveling system adds another dimension to the challenge. Link can increase his attack, magic, and life stats by spending experience points gained from defeating enemies. Each stat maxes out at level 8. The catch? The amount of experience required for each level up increases dramatically, and if Link dies and gets a game over, all accumulated experience vanishes, though purchase levels remain. This creates a tension where players must balance pushing forward versus grinding for levels, knowing that reckless advancement could cost them hours of accumulated experience. The game lacks recovery hearts, a staple of the series. Link can only restore health by leveling up, casting the life spell, finding fairies, discovering heart containers, or talking to specific women in towns. This scarcity transforms health into a precious resource that must be carefully managed across entire palace runs. There's no safety net, no generous health drops after every battle. Players enter palaces knowing they must survive on their limited resources or start over. What does this relentless difficulty mean for Hyrule's lore? When players die repeatedly to the same enemy encounters, when they struggle to make progress through palace corridors, when they're forced to retreat and grind for experience just to survive, the game creates an emotional experience that profoundly shapes their perception of the world. This isn't the thriving kingdom of the original Legend of Zelda. This is a Hyrule teetering on the brink of collapse. The game's instruction manual provides the narrative context. Following the defeat of Ganon in the first game, Link discovers a mark on the back of his hand when he turns 16. Impa, Princess Zelda's nursemaid, reveals that this mark opens a sealed room where a different Princess Zelda lies sleeping. Not the Zelda from the first game, but an ancient princess placed under a sleeping spell centuries ago by a magician who sought the secret of the Triforce. According to the backstory, this ancient king of Hyrule possessed the complete Triforce, but feared it might be misused after his death. He told his son and daughter about the Triforce of power and wisdom, but kept the Triforce of courage secret. When the king died, a magician close to the prince tried to extract the Triforce's location from Zelda. She refused, so the magician cast a sleeping spell on her, dying in the process from the spell's power. The grief-stricken prince placed Zelda in the sealed room and decreed that all women born to Hyrule's royal family would bear the name Zelda, ensuring the tragedy would never be forgotten. The Triforce of Courage remains hidden in the Great Palace, deep in the Valley of Death on Hyrule's largest island. To awaken the sleeping Zelda, Link must place crystals in 6 palaces throughout Hyrule, break the magical barrier protecting the Great Palace, defeat the Guardian Thunderbird, overcome his own shadow in the final test, and claim the Triforce of Courage. Only by uniting all 3 pieces of the Triforce can he break the ancient curse.
But here's where the gameplay and narrative collide in fascinating ways. The story tells us Link is undertaking a heroic quest to awaken a cursed princess. The gameplay tells us Link is barely surviving, dying repeatedly, struggling against enemies that require perfect execution to defeat, navigating palaces that feel like death traps rather than dungeons. The disconnect between expectation and experience becomes the game's most powerful narrative tool, even if accidentally so. When players traverse the overworld and enemies spawn constantly, when every step risks triggering another brutal encounter, when the act of moving from one location to another becomes an exercise in survival rather than exploration, Hyrule transforms from a kingdom to be saved into a hostile wasteland, where Link's very presence seems unwelcome. The game's lives system reinforces this desperation. Link starts with 3 lives and can collect 1-up dolls to gain more. When Link loses all lives and gets a game over, the screen displays Ganon's silhouette with the text, "Game over, Return of Ganon." This detail carries weight. Ganon is dead, defeated in the first game, but his followers remain active, attempting to resurrect him. According to the manual, the only way to bring Ganon back is with the blood of the hero who defeated him. Every enemy encounter, every death, every game over isn't just a failure, it's Hyrule sliding closer to Ganon's return. The constant threat of permadeath and resurrection creates a kingdom defined by desperation. This isn't a thriving realm recovering from crisis. This is a land where evil forces still hold enough power to threaten resurrection, where entire regions remain so dangerous that traveling between towns requires life or death combat, where even the hero capable of defeating Ganon struggles to survive long enough to reach the next palace. The cryptic nature of progression deepens this sense of isolation. Zelda II requires players to discover specific techniques and items without clear guidance. The downward thrust and upward thrust abilities, essential for progression and combat, must be learned from townspeople in specific locations. Miss these towns or fail to talk to the right NPCs, and players can become completely roadblocked in palaces designed around these abilities. The game features secrets and passages that defy logical discovery, invisible paths, hidden caves accessible only by crouching in specific locations, towns offering crucial information through dialogue that's easy to miss or misunderstand. The infamous "I am error" line from an NPC in Rudo Town has become legendary not for its grammatical confusion, but for perfectly capturing the game's approach to communication, obtuse, cryptic, forcing players to piece together fragments of information through trial and error. This design philosophy makes players feel lost, isolated, and uncertain, exactly how someone would feel traversing a genuinely hostile territory without guidance. The first Zelda game rewarded curiosity with secrets. Zelda II punishes ignorance with failure. The distinction is crucial. In the first game, missing secrets meant missed opportunities. In Zelda II, missing crucial information means hours of frustration, wasted lives, and potential inability to progress. From a narrative perspective, this creates a world where knowledge has been fragmented, where even the people Link encounters can only offer pieces of larger puzzles, where understanding has broken down alongside the kingdom itself. When townspeople speak in cryptic phrases or offer techniques without context, it reflects a Hyrule where communication and community have degraded. People survive in isolated pockets, their towns protected by barriers, venturing outside rarely, if at all. The palace design reinforces this atmosphere of decay and danger. Each palace features distinct color schemes. Unlike the original Famicom Disk System version, where palaces were simply gray or green, the NES release gave each palace unique visual identity. But this aesthetic choice only emphasizes how different and isolated each location feels. These aren't parts of a unified architectural tradition. They feel like separate strongholds built in different eras by different peoples, now connected only by the quest requiring Link to traverse them all. The enemies within palaces respawn differently than in typical games. Smaller enemies like bots and bubbles respawn when their positions scroll off screen. Larger enemies like Stalfos and Iron Knuckles don't respawn unless Link leaves the palace entirely. This creates a strange economy of persistence. Some threats remain defeated, others regenerate endlessly, contributing to the feeling that Link isn't truly conquering these spaces, but merely surviving passage through them. Death itself carries different weight in Zelda II. The original game allowed players to continue from where they died, losing only some progress. Zelda II implements a proximity continue system. When Link loses a life, he restarts from the palace entrance if inside a palace, or from the same general area if on the overworld. Lose all lives, it's game over. Lose all accumulated experience, return to the title screen, reload from the last save point. The stakes escalate with every death, every life lost, every step deeper into hostile territory.
This mechanical implementation of death and rebirth creates a metatextual narrative. How many times has Link died trying to complete this quest? The game never tells us, but players know. They've watched Link fall to Iron Knuckles, burn in lava, collapse from enemy assaults dozens or hundreds of times. Each death and rebirth reinforces the sense that this quest isn't a triumphant adventure, but a desperate struggle where failure comes easily and success demands everything. The connection to the Triforce itself becomes more profound through this lens. The Triforce represents power, wisdom, and courage in perfect balance. Link already possesses the Triforce of power and wisdom from the first game. His quest focuses entirely on proving himself worthy of the Triforce of courage. What better test of courage than surviving a kingdom that actively tries to kill you? What more perfect trial than forcing the hero to face overwhelming odds, punishing difficulty, and constant threat of failure? The Great Palace, the game's final dungeon, serves as the ultimate expression of this philosophy. To even reach it, Link must complete all 6 previous palaces, placing crystals to break the magical seal. The Great Palace itself is notoriously difficult, featuring the hardest enemy combinations, the most challenging platforming, and culminating in battles against Thunderbird and Link's own Shadow. The Shadow fight carries particular narrative weight. Some interpret it as a final test of worthiness. Others see it as Ganon's shade manifesting one last time. The game never explicitly explains why Link must fight his own shadow to claim the Triforce of Courage, but thematically, it's perfect. After surviving everything Hyrule has thrown at him, every palace, every iron knuckle, every death and resurrection, Link's final challenge isn't an external enemy, but himself. The shadow mirrors Link's movements, uses his techniques, fights with his abilities. Defeating it means proving mastery not just over Hyrule's dangers, but over self-doubt, fear, and limitation. Victory brings not triumphant celebration, but quiet relief. Link claims the Triforce of Courage, unites it with the other pieces, and breaks the spell on the sleeping Zelda. Peace returns to Hyrule. The screen fades. The game ends with a simple image of Link and Zelda standing together, the kingdom saved. But here's what makes Zelda II's narrative so uniquely impactful. Players don't just watch Link save Hyrule, they experience every desperate moment of that salvation. They feel the hostile kingdom through relentless combat. They understand fragmentation through jarring perspective shifts. They comprehend isolation through cryptic progression. They internalize desperation through punishing difficulty. The game's mechanical flaws, and make no mistake, many are genuine flaws, accidentally create one of the most emotionally affecting versions of Hyrule in the series. This isn't a kingdom waiting to be saved. This is a kingdom barely holding on, where evil maintains such a grip that even the legendary hero struggles to take 3 steps without fighting for his life. Where knowledge has fragmented into cryptic fragments, where architecture itself feels disconnected and alien, where the very land seems to reject the hero's presence. Traditional game design would consider this a failure. Players should feel empowered, not desperate. They should feel excited to explore, not anxious about the next forced encounter. They should feel clever when discovering secrets, not frustrated by obtuse progression. By almost every conventional metric, Zelda II's design works against player enjoyment. Yet it creates something remarkable in the process. The game inadvertently builds a Hyrule that feels genuinely desperate, authentically dangerous, structurally broken. The mechanics don't just challenge players, they communicate a world on the brink. Every iron knuckle that requires perfect execution to defeat represents a kingdom where even the guardians have become overwhelming threats. Every cryptic clue reflects a society where knowledge has fragmented. Every death and rebirth cycle emphasizes that this quest could genuinely fail, that Link could genuinely fall, that Ganon could genuinely return. Modern game design has largely moved away from Zelda II's approach. A Link to the Past, released for the SNES in 1991, returned to the top-down perspective and established the formula most subsequent Zelda games would follow. The RPG mechanics disappeared. The live system vanished. Side-scrolling remained only in limited segments in games like Link's Awakening, Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, and Echoes of Wisdom, but never as the primary gameplay mode. Zelda II stands alone in the series, the only mainline entry to embrace this particular combination of perspectives, the only one with a live system, the only one where leveling stats replaces equipment upgrades, the only one that draws so heavily from side-scrolling action games and JRPGs. Its uniqueness guarantees its divisive legacy.
Players who master its systems and embrace its challenge find depth and satisfaction. Players expecting the original Zelda's exploration-focused design encounter frustration and disappointment. But regardless of opinion on the gameplay itself, Zelda II's impact on Hyrule's narrative deserves recognition. The game created, whether intentionally or accidentally, one of the darkest, most desperate depictions of the kingdom in the franchise's history. Not because the story explicitly describes darkness and desperation, but because the gameplay forces players to feel it in every encounter, every death, every hard-won victory. The experience of playing Zelda II becomes the story of Zelda II. The constant struggle isn't a bug, it's the feature that defines this version of Hyrule. A kingdom where danger isn't just present but overwhelming, where survival isn't guaranteed but earned, where heroism means enduring the seemingly unendurable, mastering the seemingly impossible, and persisting despite every indication that failure is inevitable. In retrospect, Zelda II's so-called flaws might be its greatest narrative achievement. The game built a Hyrule that feels genuinely broken, authentically hostile, structurally fractured, and then asked players to put it back together through sheer determination and skill. The mechanics that frustrate modern players created an emotional experience that lingers decades after completion. The difficulty that drives players away imprints those who persevere with a profound sense of accomplishment. Did Zelda II's flaws ruin its story? No, they became its story. They transformed a quest to awaken a sleeping princess into an odyssey through a kingdom on the brink of collapse, where every step forward requires perfect execution, where failure comes easily, and where victory means something precisely because it was never guaranteed. The game remains divisive for good reason. Its design choices clash with series expectations and modern sensibilities. But within that divisiveness lies something remarkable, a version of Hyrule that could only exist through these specific, flawed, challenging mechanics. A kingdom that feels desperate because the gameplay makes players desperate. A world that feels fractured because the design is fractured. A hero who feels tested because players are tested. Zelda II: The Adventure of Link stands as proof that sometimes the most memorable stories emerge not from perfect design, but from the intersection of ambition, experimentation, and flawed execution, where mechanics and narrative collide to create something unintended but unforgettable.
It's not the best Zelda game. It might not even be a particularly good game by conventional standards, but it created a version of Hyrule that no other entry has matched, a kingdom defined not by what it tells players, but by what it makes them feel. And that feeling, desperation, struggle, hostile terrain, hard-won victory, defines this chapter of Hyrule's legend as powerfully as any dialogue or cutscene ever could.